All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unlocked podcast. I am incredibly excited to have our guest here today, Deb Dana. Deb is, in your bio, a clinician, consultant, and international speaker specializing in complex trauma. She is the leading translator for general readers of Dr. Stephen Porges' groundbreaking Polyvagal Theory and is a best-selling author of many books I see here. She is a mother, a grandmother, a wonderful person to be around, as I have come to find already. And she is actually bringing something to the table today that we've heard many times in our work at Owl and Key just recently around the term glimmers. And these glimmers, we're going to dive deep into that topic today. And we're going to talk about what glimmers are, how do you access them, how do you acknowledge them, what's the deep science and theory behind what glimmers are, and really how to bring glimmers more intentionally into your life to then, live a fuller life, feel safer, more grounded, more present, and also ideally, as Deb and I share, hopefully make a more positive impact in the world. So, Deb, thank you for being here and for sharing all of your wisdom and guidance with us today.
Oh, I'm really delighted to be here and to talk glimmers with you, right? I love
Yeah,
it. Yes.
beautiful. So I thought we could dive in by me telling a little story about how this work and your book, The Glimmers Journal, I'm holding up here for our listeners who aren't watching the video. It's a beautiful journal. It is colorful. I mean, it really looks like a glimmer. And it is full of guidance and prompts and easy, accessible language around how to be more intentional with your glimmers. And Deb shared this with me in advance of our conversation, and it couldn't have come at a better time. So the story goes like this. Right as I received this book a couple weeks ago, I was going through a challenging day and my mind was swirling. You know, those days where you just feel really stressed out and you just can't quite get any type of grounding in your mental capacity and everything starts to build. So I decided after kind of reading the introductory of this book and doing some of our work at Allen Key, I'm going to go for my typical non-negotiable, which is a long run on the trail through the woods, out in nature, because that's where I get a lot of clarity. Well, because of having the glimmer, I was running along, and then all of the sudden, and my nervous system was still kind of worked up. I still felt stressed, like I was working through it. But then all of a sudden, the snow started falling,
Mhm.
and in that moment, instead of just being in my brain and continuing to run along and be inside my brain, I actually thought about the glimmer and I caught one of the snowflakes on my black glove, and I actually stopped to look at it and noticed how perfectly it landed and its intricate design, and it was one of those wow moments. It was so small, but it was like a micro breakthrough that allowed me to get outside of the swirling thoughts and into a better emotion. And then as I continued to run, instead of being in my thoughts, I was really in the presence of watching this beautiful scene happen with the snow falling and the river rushing beside me. And I was actually really in that moment and my whole energy changed. It was it was special. I have chills talking about it and seemingly so small. But Deb, and from in reading your wisdom, there was a lot happening right there.
There
So
what there
can you help our readers understand what was the glimmer moment?
mm,
What
mm,
was happening? Why was I feeling that way? And what was actually going on in the system, in my
mm,
system in
mm,
that moment?
yeah. Yeah, there was a lot going on. I love that one of your regulating resources is a run in nature, right? Because your body says it needs to move in that particular way, and you've chosen to move through nature. Nature is fairly predictably a regulator of our nervous system. So you're already starting off bringing things in that are going to support you feeling a shift in your state. And so you had a lot of sympathetic nervous system energy going on. You were swirling. I love the words. You were swirling. Was lots going on. Couldn't focus. You were in your head, right, as you were running. And then you had that moment. I love the moment you said where the snow was falling and it caught your attention. Right, there was enough of something happening that it caught your attention. You stopped. That's often the case with a glimmer. A glimmer is a tiny micro moment that grabs our attention, right? And so it grabbed your attention, you stopped, and as you were describing, I was feeling it come alive in my system. That's the joy of sharing a glimmer, right? So everybody who's listening is going on that journey with you, right? And I imagined you with your black glove and then the snowflake and I grew up in Maine. I'm in snow country, and it came back. So my system came to that place of feeling nourished by it. But what happened in your system is that sympathetic energy began to be held in a tiny bit of ventral regulating energy. And so it began to organize that energy. The energy doesn't drain from your system, but you're no longer swirling in it. You're no longer stuck in your head. The energy is now being focused in some purposeful way. And for you, it was you were looking at this beautiful snowflake and really seeing it. And then as you began to move again, because you are a mover, right? And as you began to move again, you took that changed state with you. So you were now in more flow than swirl, right? If we want to think about it that way. You were in more of a flow and you were moving and you kept watching the snow falling. I was sort of imagining you were, inside your own snow globe. It was kind of a fun image for me. The snow was falling and you were moving. So what happened for your nervous system in that one tiny moment was enough to catch the attention of your nervous system and for your nervous system to feel some regulating energy come in. And as that happens, you move out of sympathetic into ventral and your story becomes different. Right, because your story is connected to your state. So your story when you started your run was one of being caught in a swirl and I can't focus and all these I can'ts or I shoulds that come with sympathetic. And as that tiny snowflake came and got your attention and brought it interrupted all of that
Mm.
in it. You stopped for a moment and could feel something different. You could feel yourself moving up into some ventral, and I don't know what your story became, but it was no longer all the shoulds or can'ts. It was now something very different. What was the story that came?
The story it became was one of just being present and that
Mhm.
it's okay.
Yes.
It's going
Right,
to be okay. And what
right.
typically happens, and it happens sooner because of that micro moment and that awareness, was that I stepped into a state of creativity and problem
Yes.
solving instead
Okay.
of in a state of swirl and
Yep.
suffering and survival and, oh
Mm,
no, the worst is going to happen. So I appreciate somebody said something, and I don't know if this is how you talk about it, but someone said, like, in the class when I heard about glimmers, when someone said, "Oh, I love this idea of glimmers and I've been practicing it and I'm putting it
mm,
into my plans." They said it feels like the opposite of a trigger, where a
mm,
trigger puts you into that state of, like I said, spiral and suffering or
mhm.
of fear and
Perfect.
doubt, and the story of the glimmer became that energy of presence, peace, okay,
Yeah.
oh, and now I can be creative, and now I can be
Right.
a problem solver.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the beauty, that's the power of something so small, but big in your system to change your state, and as the state changes, the story changes, what happens in your body changes, your feelings, your thoughts, all of that changes. So you now had access to the beauty of ventral where you can be creative, and you have a belief that it's gonna be okay, and I can do this, and you move very differently through the world, and I love glimmers as well, and we can think about them as opposite of triggers. That's fine to think about. The thing we want to remember is that the glimmers don't in any way change the triggers, right? So they're not a way to change a trigger. They're a way to bring something different in, right? And the other thing I want to say as we begin to really dive into glimmers um, they're not a way to avoid our suffering either, right? And we wanna be careful with that because there's a lot of that going around, right? Like, let's just ignore this and let's go to the good, or let's, count your blessings. Don't stay stuck in your suffering. And what we wanna know is that glimmers give us the capacity to have more access to that state of safety and connection so that we can safely then turn toward our suffering and work with it differently. So it's really a way to build the capacity to be with your suffering in a way that 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 can you can work with it. You can be with it, not relive it.
Yeah, I love how it makes me think you're not fighting against the suffering or the trigger or the stress. You're not fighting against it or trying to avoid it. What an empower it turns you toward empowerment of it. It, like you said, it builds capacity to be able to hold the space and work with whatever the circumstances are, because you feel in that sense of what I love about the glimmer is that it's not this sense of false positivity. It's not this sense of, I'm just gonna look at all the shiny fun things in the world and ignore all the hard stuff. It's not that. It is actually a sense of safety and stability and a kind of stable. I don't even know if restabilizing is the term, but it is a stable, seems like a stabilizing mechanism that then allows you to kind of show up in a different posture, in a different way, in a different thinking. I loved that idea of going the movement from the up and the down in the nervous system. And I think what's so key here, and what I want to make sure our listeners are really taking away, is that the nervous system is what's telling is kind of building the foundation for the story, and so the glimmer is meant to connect with and give you that safety and security in that foundation so that the story can be different. Instead of it's coming I think we've all maybe been told or believe that our story's coming from our brain and has to start here in all of those shoulds and experiences, and then it goes down and drives the nervous system, and what it seems like is it's flipping it on its head, this awareness of safety and security and being able to go from that direction. Am I describing it right, or how would you
Yeah.
describe you're the
Yeah.
expert here. Tell
I
us
mean,
how to think about that.
the shorthand that I use and that people seem to find easy to remember is state creates story. Right? So the nervous system state that you're in, that energy is fed to your brain and your brain creates a story to make sense of it. So when you're in that sympathetic swirl, the drivenness, the should, the seeking, that energy gets fed to your brain and your brain makes up a story about that. Right? If you're in that collapse place, which is not your preferred survival state, I think, but is my preferred survival state, that place of collapse, disconnect, sort of why bother, give up, that energy gets fed to the brain, and then you have a very different story. It's not a driven story, it's a why bother, hopeless story. And then in ventral, which is where a glimmer gives you a tiny spark of ventral. And so when you have that spark of ventral, the ventral system is one of safety, connection, organization, readiness to be in the world. And the stories there are so different. They're filled with creativity and possibility and options and hope, right? And we want to remember that when we move between states, we gain and lose access to those qualities of stories. So when you're in your sympathetic swirl, in that drivenness, you may want to have a story that it's okay, I can do it, I can be creative, but your biology will not allow you to hold on to that or believe it. Right? So we wanna, I mean, it's another way of having a bit of compassion for others and self-compassion for ourselves that, well, I'm in sympathetic, I cannot access a story of safety and creativity. It's not biologically possible. I want to, but my biology will not allow it because I'm now in a survival state. Right? So again, it's this interesting way that glimmers, this tiny moment can interrupt the survival story and give you a peek at the other story, right? And once we get that, we then want more of it, right?
Right, and should we be in the pursuit? I wanna make this point clear. Should we always be in the pursuit
Yeah.
of getting out of one state and entering into the other state?
No, and that's a great question because what we really want, nobody is regulated all the time. No human can be regulated all the time, right? It's not possible. We don't want that. It's not desirable. What we want is we want to move again down and up because it's a hierarchy. So regulations at the top, and then that fight and flight drivenness in the middle, and dorsal collapse, despair at the bottom. We go down and up in small ways all the time. If you think about your day so far today, you'll probably recognize, oh, I've visited those places already, right? I know I have, right? And that's wonderful. It adds, sort of dimension to our world, right? The thing that makes it, resilient rather than stuck in suffering and survival is that we move down and we have a pathway to come back up. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to know, oh, I am now dysregulated, and there are these paths I've created that are going to help me come back to regulation. We suffer and in our world when we experience events that are too overwhelming, and we the trauma that happens, we move into survival, we get stuck there. That's when we suffer physically, and we suffer psychologically because nervous system does both your physical and your emotional experience, and when we get stuck in survival, that's when we suffer.
That exact point was one that I highlighted in the book in the journal, and it says, "It is when we feel as though we are trapped and can't escape danger that the dorsal vagal pathway pulls us all the way back to our evolutionary beginnings. In this state, we are immobilized. We shut down to survive. From there, it is a long way back to feeling safe and social and a painful path to follow."
Yeah.
And so your
Yeah.
point is not we cannot have be moving. It's not that we wanna avoid moving through all of the different layers, it's that we don't wanna get stuck,
Exactly.
because that stuckness is
Yeah.
what creates the long-term suffering, a lot of
Exactly.
pain,
Yeah.
and so being able to be aware and bring glimmers in intentionally is what
Yes.
creates a
Yes.
pathway to keep the movement going.
Yes, and, I created a triggers and glimmers map, I don't know, 12, 14 years ago in my work with clients, because in therapy, we work with the triggers all the time. I mean, that's what our clients come to us with. They're dysregulated. They say, please help me not have this cause this. I say, great, that's what we're going to work on. And yet, the nervous system also needs to actively experience times of regulation and connection and glimmers in order to fully thrive in the world. We can survive by just working with resolving triggers, but we don't thrive. We need also the goodness of ventral. So I was looking for a word that was simple enough, not so huge, didn't feel overwhelming, so that my trauma survivor clients would say, "Well, that might be possible. Maybe. We could try." And so glimmers was the word, and for a long time, glimmers have been in my clinical practice, and then somehow they got out there in the world, which I really love. I love that they are just out there in the world now where everybody can sort of, look for their glimmers, because you're right, we don't want to chase glimmers, that's not the point. But we want to be ready to notice them because they really are all around us, and we miss them because we don't know to look for them.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners and the people in our audience, and particularly the people who go do our work, strategic planning for life and Owl and Key, they are, very intentional people. And your work and triggers have come from trauma. Your training is in trauma. And I think where our listeners and our audience feels this the most is maybe not in trauma, but just kind of in everyday. Maybe work is feeling really draining over a long period of time, and it starts to be in that suffering state for a long time, or family dynamics that have really been weighing on people in relationships that kind of cause a lot of that stress and suffering, or maybe it's health, a health complication, or maybe it's something else, the house or finances, there, or maybe all of the above, right? The majority of the people who go through our work are dealing with a lot of those complexities. And so I think where they can get a lot out of this, and where we can get a lot out of this, is that glimmer is a very accessible term to be able to say, yes, there's something triggering my nervous system and my stress. And there's also something that might stabilize me to help me keep moving and work with it instead of avoid it or try to run away or just completely just lay it all down and give up and never get back up. So I was hoping that with this conversation, maybe the next thing that would be really valuable to do is give an opportunity to the listeners to maybe notice a glimmer for themselves and how it feels in their own body today, right now, in this moment. What do you think? Do you think you can guide us through something?
Let's do that basic glimmer practice because the thing I will say is once you discover a glimmer, you're you kinda wanna look for more, both because your nervous system has an experience of that felt good, and your brain thinks, "Oh, I liked that." So, brain body together will say, "Ooh, let's see what else is out there." So, the first step is to see how do you know you've bumped into a glimmer, right? Because it's a new term and well, I don't know what's it supposed to be. So, your body might send you a signal, right? Oh, something just felt a little different. Often the brain will send a signal. When you saw the snowflake, it might have been your brain that caught the look of a snowflake, and then you spent time looking at it. My brain often brings me the rather than my body, my brain often brings me the signal glimmer. I'll look and see something, right? So stop for a minute and let's reflect on the day so far today and think, as you reflect back, is there a moment when you think, "Oh, I think that might have been a glimmer," when your body either sent you a message that felt different, that didn't feel like your swirl or your collapse, or your brain sent you a message. I just stop for a moment. That's what happens for me. Something catches my attention, I stop for a moment. So, take a moment and everybody can just reflect and see, was there a glimmer moment? That's the C. Right? And that's, all the cues that gonna remind you, "Oh, this is what glimmer feels like to me." And once we've identified that, then the next step, is as you go through your day, now that you know the cues, when one of those cues comes alive, you can stop and say, "There it is." Right? There it is. And then when you see a glimmer, stop and appreciate it for just a moment. Right? Stop and let it really sink in. Even 5 seconds is really all you need. Just let it sink in and then appreciate what it brought for you, right? And this all can be done really. I mean, the thing that I like about glimmers, it's a tiny practice. You can do it all in 5 to 10 seconds, right? Yeah. So let's just invite people again to, now that you kind of have an idea about glimmers, reflect on your day, think, was there a glimmer that now I know it was a glimmer. Stop for a moment, bring it back to life, and just appreciate it for just a few seconds. Appreciate what it brought for you. And that's it, right? That's the see, stop, appreciate. That's the basic practice, right? The journal, brings us a couple more steps because we can deepen by sharing. Right. When you shared with me, I could feel it. We create, ways to share. I usually invite people to find a glimmer buddy. Right. And then find a way to, some of my folks share pictures. They just send a little, glimmer, and then you might have sent glimmer snowflake, with an emoji. That'd be beautiful. There are all sorts of ways. So we share, and then remember, how do we mark the moment, not just in the moment, but how do we remember? Which is why I wrote the journal, because I love having a place to gather my glimmers. I think gathering glimmers is a really powerful thing to do, because what happens is a glimmer comes in, your snowflake came in, and it had its own powerful impact on your system. And then the next time a glimmer comes in, it's going to find the same sort of experience. So they accumulate, right? And the research actually tells us that as you have more of these experiences, your capacity to access ventral improves, and actually the set point in your system is going to increase a bit, right? So that your basic level of ventral regulation connection is going to increase a little bit. Is that not amazing for something as tiny as a snowflake in your case? right?
It is, and I can attest to that because since I've gotten the journal and just been having this conversation over in, my head with the journal and getting the cues and guides, the ideas that you have in the journal, the books, and the different areas in which we often find glimmers, it just helped to kind of, like, position my focus in that way, and even as we talked through that quick guided reflection, what I noticed is the accumulation has been happening even within a week, that I've noticed that I'm more easily able to access those moments where I never would have before, because the moment that came to mind from today was making breakfast for my son, and when I was putting the almond butter on the bread, which seems like such a mundane moment, but in the moment, it was so grounding because it was part of my rhythm. It was I c in the moment, I felt, "Oh, I'm not rushing. I'm calm, and I'm just here putting almond butter on the bread, and I'm smiling about it instead of like, I need to just make the breakfast and get ready for school."
Right.
But I
Right.
would never notice that before without having dug into your work and starting to take these 5 seconds to just
So
acknowledge.
your body sent you a message, it felt
Mhm.
different, and your brain then also sent you a message. I love that when you get multiple cues, because it really does get your attention, and then you could say, "Oh, this is different," right? A glimmer is that different experience that happens. I love that.
It
Yeah.
is, and so the glimmer is the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
The glimmer is a word that a passerby might say, "Oh, that's a great word for what's happening in society today, the positivity movement, avoid the hard stuff." But right, your face is
Yeah.
telling me everything.
Yeah, right.
Tell us about, because our people, the people who listen to this podcast and the people in our community, they love to understand and to dig deeper and to understand what's actually going on. I know there's a lot of science and just decades of research behind all of this. So, can you help us peel back some of the layers of how we got to this really amazing 5-second practice, but that's rooted in so much beneath it?
Yeah, yeah, so it's interesting because as we're talking and I'm thinking, I mean, part of the what feels nourishing around a glimmer is that it is quick and easy and within reach for everyone, right? And part of why people then, sometimes will use it to bypass suffering or bypass the hard things is because we want a quick fix. Right? So as you were talking, I was thinking, oh, this is really interesting because a glimmer is sort of a quick hit of ventral that over time is going to build into what we are looking for. So it's interesting. It's quick, but not the quick fix. So I just love that. I was thinking, oh, that's interesting as you were talking because really what it does is if you're stuck in a time of really feeling overwhelmed, right? I don't know what to do. My family's a mess. My business is a mess. I just don't know what to do. And you have created or want to create a glimmer practice where you're going to, just be on the lookout for a glimmer that might appear, right? Then you're taking a positive step towards finding the way back to the state of ventral in your nervous system, right? So that's and so this is a biological thing. We don't the you know the I can't think my way out of this, right? Because remember when I'm stuck in survival, my brain has a very different way of functioning. Right? So I cannot think my way back to feeling great about what's going on. My nervous system has to bring me back. And so a glimmer practice is a gentle way, and gentle is really what's needed again with the nervous system, this gentle way of having small drops of ventral over time. So that small and often patient, persistent process brings us back. And as we're coming back, we can recognize the nervous system knows the way. That's the other thing we want to remember. The nervous system knows the way back to ventral, back to regulation. And I think it inherently longs to be there. So if we can bring in tiny moments of ventral where we're giving the nervous system what it's wanting, and it will continue to build that capacity to bring us back. Every time we get stuck in survival and find the way back, we build resilience. Every time we leave and come back, we build resilience. So actually it's a good thing, right? We leave and come back, we leave and come back. You know, your children, you want them to dysregulate and come back to regulation because they build stronger systems that way, right? We want to remember that. So, again, as gather your glimmers, your nervous system brings them together and has more access to the regulating pathways. The circuits that are built into your biology has more access to those so that you are going to, we measure change with frequency, intensity, and duration. So you're going to come back, maybe more often, maybe more quickly. You're going to dysregulate less intensely, not get stuck there. Those are the changes that you can measure simply because you've done these tiny practices, right? And again, the nervous system, we don't need this great big long extended time of feeling regulated and safe and connected to reshape the nervous system. That's not how it works. And that's really, most of us don't get that. Right? We don't get these long extended times in this moment when we think, oh, the world has now changed. That's not how our lives are. That's not how our nervous system works. The nervous system says, can we do small things and then, you know, stretch the system, bring things in, let it land, and then another little thing will come in, let it land. And that's how we shape new pathways. So the thing about that I find lovely for my clients, but also just for, I love working with curious humans is my other joy. Just for, everyday people is knowing that people want to do something. They want to feel like I'm doing something to change my life. And yet it needs to not be so big that it just adds to the burdens that we're already carrying. And glimmers are meet that, right? You're doing something and they're tiny. And by the way, they're organically all around us. You don't have to create anything. You just have to be open to seeing what's there. So for, in my work with, trauma survivors, it fit every box that we needed to feel like, oh, I can do this and be successful. And for the people who, are listening and are with you, it's the same. It's right. They can feel like they're doing something and they can see the change over time. That's the other thing we want to measure, change over time. Like you were saying, I already can feel how these tiny moments are shifting. Right. So as we change over time, then we're encouraged. And it's a drop of hope, right? Because ventral, which is a glimmer, is a drop, is a spark of ventral. And in ventral, that's where hope lives. That's where possibility lives. That's where passion, joy, purpose lives. So every time you get a glimmer coming in, you can think, oh, that was a drop of hope. Or today, maybe that was a drop of joy. Or that was a tiny speck of passion, right? Whatever it is that you're feeling, that's what my system's needing, right?
Wow. I am I am for those who are not watching, I've been clapping along and excitedly smiling. The way you described it really helped me to think about how much peace and acceptance you can have for being dysregulated within yourself, almost like a you can almost become an observer, and with complete awareness that when I'm in survival state and dysregulated, I'm not as good at being an observer.
Right.
However, in building the resilience, like you're saying, it gives me the opportunity to have more acceptance of, okay, I'm dysregulated right now. That's okay. It's a normal function. And, oh, look at that. A glimmer just happened. It was a second long. And I know that my nervous system can still move back to regulation and it will. And that it, I just felt so much peace and acceptance in the movement of regulation instead of what I think I've always thought about it until I came into contact with your work, which was it's not about staying regulated all of the time. It's more about building your resiliency and your awareness of and your acceptance of moving with through the different levels because they're all necessary.
And that's the key thing. They are necessary. And when you are pulled into a survival state, when you were in that swirl, your nervous system was trying to tell you something. Right, that's what happens. There's a reason why we get pulled into survival, and if we can have enough, I love that you said the observer energy, which is ventral again, so when I'm really in it, no way, but as I begin to come out, I can think, "Oh, I can be curious." I can say, what is the nervous system wanting me to know?" Right? And that's, for you, maybe it's, trying to do too much, trying to for me, it's usually I end up in that collapse place because I haven't given myself any time to, all my deadlines, all my lists, all my stuff. So, then you get the information and then you can say, what do I do with that information? Right? That's the step 3, right? That sometimes we never get to, but whatever. So, the nervous system can hold all of that and is also exquisitely able to bring you a glimmer. And isn't that amazing? That's a beautiful both and, right? I just love that about the way our nervous system has been created.
And the information that it can provide and the clarity, because I know that when my nervous system gets to that place, and particularly if it gets to that place frequently, if I can stop in that moment when I start to step out of it and acknowledge what put me there, what was taking me there, it's not about avoiding it, but it means it's good data. It's great data to say, "Oh, okay, that meeting that I've been having consistently or my packed schedule, it doesn't work for me anymore. I need to make a change and start to make an intentional shift away from that so that that thing's not taking me back into that state and keeping me there all of the time." And a glimmer is a really great tool in helping to it's like a gap between the survival and then being in the solution. It's that moment that gives you the breath to be able to go into solutioning or go into or movement or just be
Yep.
without being in suffering.
Yeah, it's interesting for me because they're step 1 is to get the information, right? And there are lots of ways to get the information. I love that you can turn toward rather than moving away, take a moment and say, "Okay, what do I need to know?" Because if we don't do that, the nervous system is going to take more and more extreme action because it is determined to get your attention because it thinks you're in danger, right? And we see that in our family, in our friends, and in our colleagues. We can see we haven't paid attention and now we're having huge extreme emotional responses or physical illness, right? Because we haven't paid attention. So paying attention is, and paying attention to the sufferings, tough. So sometimes finding a glimmer, that's another way to pay attention. And that can feel more accessible, right? Oh, there's a glimmer, right? And the find a way to mark the glimmer with my clients, that they were so cute. They would say, "I'm gonna point at it." I said, "Great, point at it." And they'd say, "Glimmer." I said, "Great." People can have fun with it,
I
but
did that on my run, by the way, because that was in your book, and I
yeah,
pointed and I said, "Glimmer,"
love
just
it.
to
Yeah,
physically make myself remember
right,
to pay attention. So,
right.
our work is all about be aware, have awareness, pay attention, pay attention to nervous system, pay attention to internal data, and then take action. Take intentional action. And it sounds like, a very simple thing our listeners can do in moving forward is just allow yourself to pay attention to glimmers. Allow yourself to notice when something feels like a little bit of a shift, either energetically or you notice it could be a snowflake, could be almond butter bread, could be ju- just sitting in a comfortable place or being with a close connection, Nate being out in nature, as you mentioned, just kind of paying attention to those things. And as you're saying, it can be as simple as just paying attention and then calling it out. And then maybe the next step is sharing it. So, can you help us understand that once we notice these glimmers and they start to build and they start to be a tool for us and help us to move within that regulation, what does it do? What's the impact? What's the ripple effect when we start to share and then it starts to become outside of us, but also an influence to others? So, what's the kind of the long-term tail of that?
Well, here's the hopefulness. Here's the dream, right? That when I when I find glimmers, then I have more access to regulation. Right, so let's start with just glimmers. If I then have and I have a few glimmer buddies. When I share a glimmer with one of my glimmer buddies, they receive it. They feel my joy in it, and they often feel it too, right? Because, it can be that one person's glimmer is another person's trigger. So it doesn't always work that way. For you and me, it was wonderful because I love snow. So it was a glimmer for me too. So my system felt that energy as well. So when we share glimmers, we're then inviting someone else to feel that regulating energy, the energy of connection, right? And the more we feel that sense of safety, connection, and regulation, we then broadcast that out to every nervous system around us. So here's where we get to the thought that we then create collective nervous systems, right? That if I'm anchored in this place and I am, just feeling, the glimmers and feeling myself anchored there, that I'm then putting that out into the world. And every nervous system around is going to take notice of that. Your brain may not, but the nervous system does. And that may be a moment of interruption for another nervous system, right? I love when I'm feeling regulated, I smile at somebody as I'm going by, right? And oftentimes I think, oh, I just sent a glimmer. And part of the last part of the journal is about glimmering, being a glimmering presence in the world. When I'm regulated, I can send glimmers. I can smile. I can say hi. I can hold a door. I can help somebody pick something, anything, right? And then my intention is that's a glimmer for them. Don't know how it lands, but most of the time I get that back, right? You can feel you've just made a difference in someone's life by this tiny moment. And that is going to help build their capacity. And the more people who can anchor in ventral, our world will begin to change, right? I think about, one nervous system at a time is kind of the way I think about it, right? I have no idea how to change the systems that if I look out there in the world I think are broken, I get overwhelmed immediately, but I can work here. I can work with my system. And one of the ways I work with my system because, like you, like many of us, it feels like a challenging time in the world right now, and I can feel very tired and overwhelmed, and yet I can find a glimmer. That's within reach, and so I do that, and one of the things that, in the glimmer journal is to create an intention around glimmers, right? Create an intention, and, there's a process for writing an intention because it has to feel within reach, and it has to feel like an invitation. In the beginning, my clients, they loved glimmers. They'd say, "I'm gonna find 5 a day, Deb, and I'm gonna bring them back to you." And I'd say, "Okay, let me say that to you and see how it lands. You're gonna find 5 glimmers a day and bring them back to me." And they'd look at me and go, "I can't do that." I said, "Of course you can't. Your brain made up that intention. Your nervous system said no, right?" So, you check it out with your nervous system. Make it free and open in the beginning. Because if you feel successful, you're going to keep doing it, and again, that ripple effect, I think, can be really powerful, right? Because we know what it's like to be around a whole bunch of people who are dysregulated. It's hard to hold yourself in any kind of regulation. The same is true as we send out glimmers, as we have other people receiving them, we then begin to create a critical mass of people who are regulated. And wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that begin to shape the world in a new way?
Beautifully. And what I love about that positioning too, and in the work in yours and Stephen's, that kind of co-regulation, that idea of that influence and kind of flow and togetherness that we have in that nervous system, it not only sets you up to be a giver of a glimmer, to be a glimmering, but to also receive, and that reciprocity to say, I'm not in a glimmering state. And that's okay. And I'm also surrounded by other people who are glimmering because thankfully we all glimmer at different moments.
Exactly. Isn't that a great image to think about? Right? All the pops of glimmers all over the place. I love it. Yeah.
You
See, that
know,
was a glimmer when you said that. I went, "Ooh, I like that."
yeah, yeah. I mean, last night I have a great example. I was about to go, I was lower on energy, and we had plans to go over to our best friend's house and have the kids play together. And energetically, I was a little lower, but my friend is in a state of glimmer right now. And just her energy was an invitation, and us sitting around the fire, the kids playing, and having wonderful conversation with really close friends, that turned in it shifted my energy. So that experience of you can also be a receiver in that glimmering and being and I think the other thing there is being surrounded by other people who, to your point, are kind of accountability buddies or friends in glimmering who, can kind of fill that role for you when you're not in that state.
Yeah, and accept you. They say, "It's okay. Come on along. It doesn't matter if you're, wherever you are, you're welcome." Right? And we need people like that. We need places like that in our lives. And yes, I think ventral is contagious. Right? So you began to feel you were held in a stream of glimmers with your glimmering people, and you were held in that, and your system began to feel that, and you didn't have to come and be, high energy, happy, joyful, but you could feel at ease, at peace. You could feel welcome and seen. Yeah,
Yeah, it's really
yeah.
wonderful. I'm also getting this vision of us, in the Trolls movie where they have, like, actual glimmering trolls,
Yes.
with
Yeah.
sparkly trolls. I'm
Yeah.
thinking of all of us walking around as sparkly humans.
I love it. Let's do it.
Aw
There are some lovely images that have come out of our conversation today, and I think sparkly humans I'm taking that one with me. That is such fun. I love it.
well
I love it.
Deb, we are coming up on our time, and so I wanna be thoughtful of your time. We are incredibly grateful that you have shared so much wisdom, and I know that there is exceptional depth and just so much knowledge and wisdom to be shared from you and the work that you do. We like to ask our guests where people can dive a little deeper. Where can they find you? Where can they find the Glimmer Journal to start their journey and to start, making sure that they're accumulating their snowflakes.
Exactly. Accumulating their snowflakes. That's great. Well, my website, rhythmofregulation.com, is where everything lives. And we try to keep it updated and put free material, and got some beautiful meditations there. So come along and see what fits for you. And the Glimmers Journal, I think you and I have like advanced copies. I think it's actually coming out in I don't know, March maybe. I don't know. So yes, I feel lucky to have one in my hands, So, but yeah, that will be out soon, and I'll be curious to see how it's received. I've never done a journal before. It was a new experience for me, but it just came from, it sort of emerged from my personal experience, and I thought, yeah, and I people kept asking me, "How do I do it?" I said, "Well, let's create something." So, we'll see. It's to see how it goes and see if people, um, find it useful. I'm glad that you have had a good experience with it. I loved writing it, and so my heart is in it, so hopefully you feel that.
It is felt, and I will just be the since it is an advanced, copy, thank you. I'm so grateful that I got to have it before this conversation because I can then really champion what I've experienced from it. I've been carrying it around with me, and it's beautifully done for anybody who is wanting to get a copy of it for when it does come out. Easy to use, very straightforward, and the heart is in it. So, a really worthwhile tool to get started on the journey and not feel overwhelmed by it. And that's what can happen a lot. I know with our own work, it can get really, hefty within strategic planning for life. And yours is incredibly lightweight. It really is an invitation. It's an invitation to go on this journey. And I'm excited to share. We might have to grab some of those copies in March to share them with
No,
our community of people.
sounds lovely. Sounds lovely.
Well, Deb, thank you so much for joining us. It has been the glimmer of my day for sure. And I know that all of the listeners are going to feel the exact same way. So we really appreciate you spending your time with us.
I had a lovely time, a glimmer in my day too. Thank you.